Take a moment. Slow your breath and imagine this. You're pushing a massive wheel. At first, it barely moves. Every push feels pointless. Your muscles burn, your patience fades, and your mind starts whispering, "This isn't working." But if you keep pushing, if you don't stop, the wheel begins to turn on its own. That wheel is compounding. And the force that makes most people stop pushing before it ever moves? Ego. Ego is invisible. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And that whisper is powerful enough to block years, sometimes decades, of growth. In this audiobook, we're going to explore how ego quietly sabotages compounding in your skills, your finances, your health, your relationships, and your mindset. Not by destroying progress outright, but by preventing it from ever getting started. And let's begin. Part 1. What compounding really is. Most people misunderstand compounding. They think it's about speed. They think it's about intensity. They think it's about doing more. But compounding is about continuity. Compounding is what happens when small actions are repeated long enough that results stop looking linear and start looking exponential. One workout doesn't change your body. One study session doesn't make you smart. One investment doesn't make you wealthy. One kind act doesn't build trust. But thousands of them do. Compounding rewards patience, consistency, humility, and ego hates all three. Ego wants visible results now. Compounding works quietly later. That tension is where most people lose. Part 2. Ego's first weapon. Impatience. Ego hates being a beginner. It hates looking foolish. It hates slow progress. It hates the feeling of being behind. So when you start something new, ego asks, "Why am I not good at this yet? Why isn't this working already? Other people are moving faster than me." And if compounding hasn't kicked in yet, ego assumes it never will. So you quit, you switch strategies, you jump to something new, you restart again and again and again. From the outside, it looks like experimentation. From the inside, it's fear disguised as intelligence. Compounding requires staying with something long enough that boredom replaces excitement. Ego can't survive boredom. Part 3. The comparison. Trap. Ego doesn't measure progress against your past self. It measures progress against other people. And comparison kills compounding faster than failure ever could. Because when you compare, you don't see timelines. You see highlights. You see someone's chapter 10 while you're still on page 2. And ego says, if I'm not ahead, I'm losing. So instead of stacking bricks, you start chasing shortcuts. You stop building foundations and start copying roofs. But compounding doesn't care about appearances. It only cares about accumulation. Quiet accumulation. Part 4. Ego and the need to be right. Compounding depends on feedback, and feedback is uncomfortable. Feedback tells you that something you did yesterday could be done better today, that something you believed might not be entirely true. To receive feedback, you must admit you're wrong, and ego would rather stay wrong than feel small. Ego equates being wrong with being weak. It treats correction as an attack. It hears feedback as judgment. So when ego is in charge, something subtle happens. You don't stop learning. You stop adjusting. You defend bad habits because admitting they're bad would hurt your pride. You justify poor decisions because owning the mistake would bruise your identity. You reject criticism not because it's false, but because it threatens how you see yourself. And instead of listening, you explain. You talk. You rationalize. You prove. You protect. But compounding only works when errors are corrected early. A tiny mistake, barely noticeable today, repeated every day becomes catastrophic over time. A slight miscalculation, a small excuse, a minor shortcut. Ego delays correction. Humility accelerates growth. And here's the irony. Admitting you're wrong early feels painful, like a sharp sting. But refusing to admit it later feels devastating, like watching years collapse under the weight of one uncorrected flaw. Part 5. The identity problem. Ego doesn't just protect actions, it protects identity. Identity feels sacred, permanent, untouchable. I'm not a math person. I'm just not disciplined. That's not who I am. These sound harmless, even honest. But they're not observations. They're cages. When ego attaches labels, compounding dies. Because compounding requires flexibility. It requires the ability to evolve. To grow, you must be willing to say, I'm not good at this. Yet. I can become someone new. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm learning. Ego hates the word yet, because yet implies change. Ego wants permanence. Growth requires fluidity. Compounding doesn't ask you to reinvent yourself overnight. It quietly reshapes who you are through repetition. But ego refuses to wait long enough to witness the transformation. So it locks you into who you've been and robs you of who you could become. Part 6. Ego and overconfidence. Ego doesn't always look insecure. Sometimes it looks confident, certain, unshakable. This version of ego says, I already know this. I don't need the basics. That's too simple to matter. And this is often the most dangerous form, because it feels earned. But that's how people abandon fundamentals. They skip sleep, ignore nutrition, rush practice, stop reading, avoid listening. Because fundamentals feel boring, and boredom feels beneath them. But compounding lives in fundamentals: sleep, nutrition, practice, reading, saving, listening. Boring things done repeatedly. Ego chases complexity because complexity feels impressive, but impressive systems collapse when they can't be repeated. Compounding rewards simplicity because simplicity survives pressure. Part 7. Why quiet people win. Have you noticed something? The people who compound the most are rarely the loudest in the room. They don't announce every step. They don't document every effort. They don't seek constant validation. They don't need applause, because ego feeds on attention, and attention disrupts compounding. The moment your focus shifts from doing to being seen doing, consistency begins to crack. Quiet effort builds momentum. Loud effort builds pressure. Pressure demands performance. Performance demands results. Results demand speed. And speed kills compounding. Pressure leads to burnout. Burnout ends progress. The quiet ones keep going because no one is watching. And that's why they win. Part 8. Ego's fear of small wins. Ego wants drama, a transformation, a breakthrough, a miracle. It wants a story worth telling. But compounding offers none of that. At first, it offers 1% improvements, slight discomfort, barely noticeable gains, progress so small it feels insulting. Ego looks at that and says, that's not worth it. But here's the truth. Small wins are not small when repeated. They're invisible early and unstoppable later. Compounding doesn't impress ego. It bores it. And ego dismisses what doesn't impress. Wisdom invests in what accumulates. Part 9. The long game ego refuses to play. Compounding only reveals itself to people who commit without guarantees. Ego demands proof before effort. But proof comes after persistence. This is the paradox. You must believe without evidence long enough for evidence to appear. Ego cannot tolerate uncertainty. It wants assurance, certainty, immediate feedback. So it chooses short-term certainty over long-term growth. That choice feels safe, comfortable, reasonable, until years pass and nothing has changed. Part 10: How to Step Out of Ego. Let's slow down here, because this part matters. You don't defeat ego by attacking it. You weaken ego by ignoring it. Here's how. Measure progress against yesterday, not others. Fall in love with repetition, not outcomes. Stay a beginner longer than feels comfortable. Seek correction, not validation. Choose boring consistency over exciting chaos. And most importantly, detach your self-worth from speed. Slow growth is still growth. Quiet growth is still growth. Invisible growth is often the most powerful of all. Part 11: Compounding as a lifestyle. When ego loosens its grip, something changes. You stop rushing, you stop proving, you stop forcing, and you start stacking. Days stack, habits stack, skills stack, confidence stacks. Not dramatically, not loudly, but relentlessly. This is how ordinary people build extraordinary lives, not by intensity, not by talent, not by ego, but by staying long enough for compounding to finally speak. And when it does, it speaks loudly, just not to everyone. Ego doesn't block compounding by making you fail. It blocks compounding by making you stop. Stop too early. Stop too often. Stop before momentum appears. Compounding belongs to those who stay when progress feels invisible. So ask yourself, can you keep going without applause? Without certainty? Without comparison? If you can, time will do the rest. Pause, breathe, and remember, ego wants to feel big today. Compounding wants you to win tomorrow. Choose wisely.